Perfect. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Building Life Sciences Adventures. This is our second session of the day on how to develop the best teams. So very, very excited for this one. Just a couple of questions, housekeeping points before we start. You will notice that your microphones have automatically been put on mute. So do you keep them like that throughout the session? However, feel free to keep your cameras on. In terms of questions, please do ask them via the chat, and we'll pick them up either along the way or at the end. But don't hesitate to ask any questions. And lastly, closed captions are enabled if you require that. Accessibility, and as you may have seen, the session is recorded and will be available to watch after. So I'll now hand you over to Geoff, and thank you everyone for joining.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Geoff Dobson. Welcome to this session. In a moment, I'm going to ask the other members of the panel to give brief introductions about themselves. But before that, I'm just going to say a little bit about how we're going to proceed with this session. In the next hour or so, we won't be using slides or any other forms of presentation material. What we're going to do is have as organic and free-flowing a conversation as we can. When we were preparing for this meeting last week, we had a similar session, and one of the things that we found was that there was no lack of energy or lack of input from the team. We had tons and tons of ideas, insights, experiences that we were able to just bounce off each other. So if we can recreate that energy today, I think we'll have done very well. What we would like everybody to do, if possible, is if you have questions, could you open the chat? So if you're not familiar with this, just hover your mouse on the bottom of your screen. You'll see a range of different icons. There's a chat button, and you can post questions in the chat. We will try to pick them up. We might save them all for the end, or it might be that we're able to stop at the halfway point or 2/3 or so and pick some of the questions up as we go along. So we're going to do quite brief intros. If you need to learn more about any of our backgrounds, it's all on the app. And of course, we're all connectable through LinkedIn. As I said, my name is Geoff Dobson. My current activities are that I am the managing partner of an organisation called Newgrange Consultants. Newgrange are specialists in leadership assessment and leadership development. And I'm also a non-executive director at an executive search firm called Compass. So just going clockwise around the screen, Jackie, could you introduce yourself and then pass yourself on to Claire?
Sure. So my name is Jackie Macritchie, and I'm the VP Regional General Manager in the Drug Discovery Division at Charles River. For those who don't know, Charles River is a contract research organisation, and so we work with different partners from academia, biotech, pharma, and not-for-profit organisations. So we need to be able to create and operate in teams that span countries and cultures, and that are made up of multiple different scientific disciplines and other business functions. So the ability to quickly form these high-performing teams is really key to our success, be that internal teams, be that external to our partner organisations. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Claire?
Hi folks, I'm Claire Thompson. I'm Chief Exec of Agility Life Sciences. We are an award-winning formulation development CDMO. We work mostly with small and medium-sized biotechs to turn their badly behaved molecules, they're all badly behaved, into smart formulations that give them the best chance of success, not only in preclinical studies, but also allow them to be accelerated onto clinic. One of my mantras is that success is not a solo sport. I've built an incredible team around me, and they're all much more talented than I am. So culture and having a phenomenal tribe is something that's very close to my heart. Stephen.
Thank you, Claire. So yes, I'm Stephen Wilkinson. I am working as a people partner and growth partner for a business called singular biotech, also known as singular talent in some circles. I've spent really 25 years in the talent management and recruitment business in various different industries. It's all been in the life sciences sector over the last 6 or 7 years. And over that time, I've seen the impact that poor management within an environment can have on the morale and the performance of a team. And had the privilege and the pleasure of being able to help some of my clients and indeed some of the companies that I've worked for turn difficult situations into really positive situations and build environments where we've ended up with a thriving and happy workforce, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about that during the course of the conversation today.
Good, great. Thank you, everybody. So the first theme that we want to explore is how do organizations best develop and cultivate a culture of team working within their organization? So to kick off, I'd like to ask Claire just to say a few words about how she stimulates and encourages a team culture within her organization.
Yeah, so if I can, I'm a biochemist by training, so I'm going to start off by talking about bacteria. So if you put bacteria in a nourishing culture, it's amazing how easily and quickly they flourish. And we as humans, we're just glorified bacteria. If you give people a nourishing environment, if you give them an environment in which they can succeed, they will flourish. You support them, allow them to do their job, empower them, enable them, give them that really supportive environment, then they will flourish. And that's what that's one of our core values, is give people an environment in which they can succeed. So as part of our organization, culture is incredibly important. So I'm a big believer that culture should not come from the top of an organization. It has to come from within and embody it, and that individuals have got to, really buy into it and live by that. So a few years ago, when we were putting together our values, our behaviors, we turned those into a culture document. So what do they mean to us? And that wasn't done by me. It wasn't done by the management team. That was done by our culture club. I'm a child of the 80s. There'll be a few on the call who are not old enough to remember culture club. But essentially, they're individuals from different lines within our organisation that come together, and they're really the barometer of our success within the organisation. So they help us to understand, are we celebrating enough? Because we need to celebrate when things happen and not think, that's done, let's move on to the next thing. We need to celebrate regularly. If things aren't going well, they feed that back to make sure that we correct that. And they've put together our culture document. They worked up our 4-day week pilot program to make sure that we were being successful through that as well, and also working on menopause policies, etc. So I think it's absolutely imperative that culture is at the center of an organization, and it's really the culture piece, which is the main thing that keeps me awake at night, is how do I ensure that I am creating an environment in which people can succeed and they can be the best that they can be, and that culture is maintained. And I know that we are 15 people at the moment. I really want to grow the organization, and I know that will be something that we'll have to work really hard at to maintain that culture as we grow. And I know that Jackie and Stephen have some sense of that as well as they've grown their organizations.
Good, great, thank you, Claire. So Jackie, could I ask you to talk about the context of teams? Because I remember when we were talking about this last week, you made a very good point that we need to recognize every one of us. We don't sit in one single team. We tend to take part in a number of different teams at any stage of our working week. We might be involved in lots of different tracks. So could you say a little bit more about how you see teams and culture fitting together?
Sure. So, I mean, I echo everything that Claire has said about culture, and it is at the heart of absolutely everything we do. If you get the right sort of culture in the organisation, then people feel able to speak up. And if you're in a team environment, you need to be able to speak up. So the key really is to understand the direction of travel, the vision of the team that you're in, and that will be different as you go across different teams. But as long as everybody is completely aligned on the vision of that team and can get behind that vision, then the behaviours that are displayed, the fact that people are listened to, the fact that people are supported, as Claire mentioned, is really key. And I can think of one example where, and I'm going back 20 years, so it had such a profound effect on me 20 years ago, I still remember it today. And a client had come to us and they wanted us to work on a project. So we pulled a team together of scientists based on what we understood the project to be. We're all sitting around the table, the client comes in the door, sits down, and we get ready to do our pitch and how we're going to work and everything. And the client said, stop. We want to show you some photographs first. And the client had just come back from a visit to Bangladesh and visiting cholera hospitals in Bangladesh. And what they did was they showed us the photograph history of their trip to Bangladesh and the children's hospitals and how they dealt with cholera patients. And the difference that that made to the team that was sitting around the table, they not only understood the common vision, they felt the power and the passion in order to be successful. So that one 15-minute photograph session was what it took to really gel that whole team together. So it's getting that passion behind it, but it's also getting that common vision and it's getting that understanding of what we're trying to achieve as a team, I think is really important.
Good, thank you, Jackie. And Stephen, I remember when we were speaking last week, you raised a couple of themes around the importance of values and how performance management integrates into how we think about teams. So could you say a few words about those two topics, please?
Yeah, I certainly can. And you know, just a couple of things on what Claire and Jackie have said, because I completely echo their sentiments. I love Claire's characterization of us as just being bacteria that need the right environment to thrive. And I think she's absolutely right in many ways. What you don't hear in Claire's story, and maybe what comes through a little bit more in Jackie's story there, is the importance of leadership, first of all, and how important it is to have the leaders bought into this this idea that we need to create this this culture that works and thrives together. You need to actively pay attention to how a team is built and how a team works. So that it's not just a collection of individuals. And I think I've had a client previously where, you know, it was a relatively large business by that time. It was 120, 130 people when I was talking to them, but they'd started out as a very small business, and they'd grown organically over time. And the leaders within that business all remembered how they used to have fun together. Anyone in the company could talk to anybody else in the company. They used to have conversations over coffee. They used to go out and do events together. And they absolutely didn't understand where that had gone, because now they were a much bigger organization and they didn't have that direct interlinking with every member of the business. They started to lose a lot of that coherence and a lot of that team spirit. And actually, when I started talking to them, they had a staff attrition rate of almost 40%, which is unbelievable. It's extraordinarily unhealthy. And again, they didn't understand why, because as far as they were concerned, this was a great place to work. They were doing great science. They loved it. They didn't understand why everyone else didn't love it. And what it boiled down to actually was a breakdown in communication. You know, the leaders had a real sense of mission, a real sense of vision, a real idea about what the values of the company should be, and what they believed in. but this wasn't being transmitted to the rest of the business, and actually no one in the business was transmitting back to the leadership team what they felt the values of the business were, and you know, how they felt the organization should operate, and what their own personal values were. And I think the first step that we took with them was to try and bring some alignment to that. And exactly as Claire said, you know, this isn't a top-down thing. This isn't, here are your values and this is what you must now believe in, because that absolutely doesn't work, right? So we sat down and we had a session where essentially everyone in the company came together in groups. We didn't do it all 100 plus of us in one place, but we had group sessions where everyone came together and we discussed what the values were going to be, what the mission was. Surprising number of people had no idea what the objectives of the business were. And you know, there'd been no articulation of this over a period of time. But we went then a stage beyond that and looked at the values. What we didn't want to create was just a set of statements that you could plaster on the wall and say, here are our values. What we wanted to do was turn these into something that we could measure individual performance and the company's performance against. So we translated the values into a series of competency statements, essentially. And really what these boiled down to were, this is how you measure how you're performing against the values, and this is how you assess how the business, or how you feel the business is performing against the values. And we're going to ask you on a regular basis how you think we're doing. And as you know, as we ask those questions, we'll start to see where things are falling down, where things aren't working, and we'll then work to address those. And it was a very simple exercise. It took a bit of time. It's not an easy thing to do. But once we'd been through a couple of iterations of the questionnaire, we looked again at the attrition rate within the business, and we brought it down to 18% by that point, and ultimately got it down to about 13%, which was, you know, fantastic. More importantly, the leadership team felt that they now had an engaged workforce behind them. They felt they had people with them in the business that wanted to be there and wanted to do the work that they wanted to, that they were hoping to complete. And the people within the business felt like they had a sense of purpose again. They had something that they were driving towards, and that they could that they could feel proud of. And it made a huge difference to the morale and the engagement of the staff across the board.
Thank you, Stephen. I think what's really powerful in that last example is the simple metric of saying that if you reduced a turnover rate from 40% to 12 or 13%, that's a measurable financial improvement to the performance of the business. But we talked as well, I think, here about some interesting themes about the extent to which people feel engaged and aligned with what's happening. I think I heard someone talking about the problem of what happens if values are being broken in some ways. And I think in a previous discussion, one of our panelists used an expression about saying culture isn't just for the good times. So across the panel, are there any more examples where you would say, here's a tangible business benefit where I could sort of say, through experience, through history, I remember an occasion where we did some work on culture or on team alignment, and it paid dividends. We could actually demonstrate the business benefit in that.
I don't know if it's an example that necessarily I can point to as having experienced directly myself, but I do occasionally fall back on the example of Vertex, actually, in this industry. And you know, I use them as an example when I'm talking about discretionary effort and the ability of a business to be, or the increased resilience of a business as a result of having that engaged workforce, having that workforce that are willing to work or do a little bit more and go beyond the scope of their defined job role to help. And Vertex, I'm sure a lot of the people on this webinar will know the example, but they didn't set out to combat CF. They set out looking for something completely different, and the science didn't work. And it's a story that repeats itself over and over again in biotech. The science doesn't always work. In fact, it doesn't often work. It often proves that what you're trying to do doesn't work. Now, when that happens, there are two situations that commonly come up. One, the business starts to decline. People start to leave. People go away looking for something else. It's difficult to get investment, and ultimately, the whole thing gets scaled back, or worse, gets shut down. In the Vertex example, they had a look around, looked at the science that they'd already done, looked at what they'd achieved, and started to work towards an alternative. And I think you can probably point at Genentech in exactly the same way. You know, there are lots and lots of stories of how the people in a business have come together to reassess where they are, and fight to make what they've got work. And I think that, as I said, discretionary effort, that ability to pivot and change direction and turn a failure into a success comes when you've got that strong culture, that strong identity, that sense of people who want to work towards a common objective and a common goal and achieve something as a unit.
Yeah, good. We've had a question that's come through, which I think is extremely relevant one, which is about breaking through communication barriers, making sure that the leadership of an organization is truly listening to what's coming up through the organization. And the person who's asked this question has said, you know, sometimes organizations are distracted with other noise, you know, there's other noise at the top. So any comments from any members of the panel where you would say a good way to make sure you either break through communication barriers or make sure there aren't barriers in the first place, to make sure that you continuously engage? Jackie, Claire, Stephen, any thoughts?
I can talk about some of the things that we did a few years ago. So I would say we had a culture issue in the organisation going back sort of 10 years. And a lot of it stemmed from, Charles River's quite an acquisitive company, so it buys companies, and then these companies have to work together. And that doesn't happen. It's not organic. You actually have to actively make that work. And, you know, I was given a role of bringing two different companies together at one point. And the cultures in the two companies were all very positive, very science focused, very driven, but were different. And they were actually in conflict with each other to a certain extent. So trying to get in at the bottom level, so pretty much as Claire and Stephen have both said, getting in at the bottom of the organisation, understanding that, and then working upwards is really important. And we put in a suggestion box, first of all. And it was just a cardboard box in the different write-up areas, so there was no barrier for people to put things in. So they would put notes in, and I would sit and read them and be completely disheartened by them because it was nothing but complaints. So we started to talk to them about their complaints. It wasn't just a piece of paper, an anonymous piece of paper. We started to get people to put their names to the complaint, because then you can do something. You know, my comment standing in front of them was, I've got all these pieces of paper, but I can't understand what you mean by them. So we started to build trust. So a lot of it comes back to trust. Then we moved to an electronic system where people were happy to put their name against it. And then we started what we called a continuous improvement culture, whereby we took the suggestions, people could see we were taking action on some of the suggestions, and then it went over time from being complaints to being constructive solutions and suggestions. And that was a journey. But now we've got what we call ground up teams for continuous improvement. So it's people at the bottom saying, have you thought about, could we do? And depending on the size of it, it either bubbles up the organisation to the level that can make the decision, or if it's something that they can do, they're empowered just to go and do it and fix it and make things better on the ground. So I think it's all about listening, and it's, management have to want to do that, and senior leadership have to want to do that. And I think in today's day and age, I'm seeing an awful lot more openness from senior leadership to the organisation, how the organisation is feeling.
That point, Jackie, about listening and dialogues are a really, really important one. I want to turn in a moment to Claire to ask her for some observations. But before I do that, I just want to mention for everybody who's listening today, I'm not sure if anybody was also on the previous session today in the conference where the topic was on neurodiversity. But one of the things that struck a chord with me was one of the speakers said, if your default position is you don't know whether you should communicate or you shouldn't, choose communicate, ask people, talk to people, ask questions and listen. And it was such simple advice, but it was within the context of that, it was really powerful. What I would suggest to everybody listening is if you do have 40 minutes to spare later in the day, have a quick listen in to that discussion about how organizations can make sure that they're inclusive. It's a different perspective, but really valuable stuff. So Claire, if I could just turn to you. I mean, you're very clearly on this panel and you are a senior executive. You are potentially one of these people who, despite all of your energy and enthusiasm for culture and values, you might sometimes be accused of saying, well, maybe Claire isn't listening. Maybe Claire isn't in touch with what's happening. So what do you do to make sure you stay in touch?
Yeah, thank you for that. I thought you were going to say Claire isn't talking enough. And
no one accuses
someone, yeah, nobody's going to accuse me of that. Somebody from Northern Ireland, we've got a certain word count that we need to get out a day. So I'm never accused of not talking enough. I want to reflect back on what Jackie said about trust. Fundamentally, having trust within an organization, not just trust that people are doing their jobs regardless of where they are, but trust that they know what they're doing and they're making the right decisions. We have no egos in our organization at all, and I think we're going to talk about how we recruit people too. We've no egos within our organization. Everybody that is within my tribe is smarter than I am. I'm great tactically as a former footballer. Technically, I'm all right, and everybody else is better than I am, and that's why they're there. I think our culture and our communication and the way that we work with each other really is born out of the fact that I took the risk. I was brave during the pandemic and set up our formulation labs in September 2020, and the way that we work together at the start and the values that brought out in us has really stood us in good stead going forward. So one of the values that we embraced and still sits with us is well-being over workload. So I led by example in communicating when I was going up and down my stress curve. So if the workload was too much or the stress was too much, then I would talk to my team about it, going, I can't make that decision today, or I don't think I can do that. Can we do this then? Or I was talking to them about how I was feeling, and I think that as leaders, authenticity is absolutely key. And if you can go one step further and be vulnerable when you're not feeling it, or you don't feel like you have the information, you don't feel like you have the skills, then do so, then communicate that. Anyone who follows me on social media will know that I'm a big fan of wordplay, and I've come up with another acronym. So I think the best leaders are the haves, and they have humility, authenticity, vulnerability, and empathy. And each of those things, that openness, really demonstrates an excellent level of communication. I've got a 7-year-old daughter, and she is teaching me about communication as well. And I try and teach her as much as I can, but I think I learn more than her than she does from me. And the way in which we communicate when things are difficult, or we're struggling with things, or we're not getting things right, we go, okay, what is this really about? What are the things that we're really struggling with? And she calls it worry angles. So what is it you're worried about? Let's come at it from this angle. Let's come at it from that angle. And actually, I'm bringing that into my working life as well. What is this really about? Let's come at this from a different angle. Let's worry angle this. So I think as leaders, we need to demonstrate humility, authenticity, vulnerability, empathy, and look at things from different angles. Let's worry angle things and figure out where the problems are coming from. And I think Jackie demonstrated that perfectly of, okay, there seems to be a lot that's wrong, but what is it that's really wrong and what can we do about it? And having that trust in her team and then demonstrating the trust in her to talk openly about things, because we're all people, we're all grown-ups. And to be able to have that open communication is absolutely vital.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks. One of the things that I think really comes through when we have this discussion is that great teams are made up of individual contributors. There's lots of people within a team. People bring different things to the team. One thing that happened in our previous discussion was I accidentally started a fire because I posed a question and said, well, you know, this is a science-based industry where complex ideas, complex research is fundamentally important to what we do. Is it possible, is it the case that sometimes brilliant individuals are more important than teams? And when I asked that question, the responses were very clearly in favor of saying, well, no, yeah, you need brilliant individuals, but teams are more important. And Stephen, I remember you picked up on this in terms of saying where innovation comes from, and it doesn't necessarily just come from one individual being brilliant and doing deep research into one thing, but you talked about how teams come together and share ideas. So perhaps you could touch on how teams share ideas and information.
I wish I could remember what I said last time around, Jeff, that made such an impression on you. But no, I mean, I absolutely believe that, and I think, of course, innovation can come from individuals, and I'm not going to suggest for a moment that it doesn't. Individuals contribute to that effort, but I think it's in conversation, in discussion, in collaboration with other people that the ideas really start to, certainly with me, if I'm talking or working with someone else, the things that they're saying, the things that are happening around me will really help me come up with new ideas, and just being challenged on the ideas that I have already will force me to think a little bit more and look at different angles. I think when we were talking about this, I probably danced in on the coattails of things that Jackie and Claire had probably already come up with, and I know Claire and Jackie as well, actually, both fundamentally believe that a team is significantly stronger than an individual in every situation. And I'm very much of the same opinion. I've seen the damage that an individual can do to a team, and you know, I don't want to be the one here talking about negative impacts all the time, but a single individual can bring down a team very quickly if they are of the belief that they are the only important voice in the room. Where I tend to come from when I'm talking about teams and different opinions is that I'm a really firm believer in the diversity piece. I think, yeah, I missed your session this morning, and I wish I hadn't, because the neurodiversity angle and the conversation around that is a really interesting one. It's a fascinating conversation, and actually the input of neurodiverse or neurodivergent individuals within a team it's enormously valuable if you can get them to contribute, if you can make them feel comfortable enough in an environment. And this goes for any individual, actually. It's not just neurodivergent people. Any individual within an environment needs to feel comfortable and needs to feel confident enough that they can speak up and contribute. I did a session not long ago on again, it was on values actually with a client of mine, and we broke the business into small groups on this occasion. I think we had 6 or 7 people in each room, and in each room there were really big personalities, really big characters that wanted to speak up and always wanted to be contributing. In one group in particular, there was one individual who was very quiet and sat at the side, didn't really say a huge amount until he was prompted to. And when someone pointed out that he hadn't said anything and did he have any thoughts and would he like to contribute, he said something that brought the entire room to a standstill and everybody else just shut up and looked at him. And it was just the simple fact that he came from a very different background. He said something that just made everyone else think, hadn't even thought of that. It hadn't even occurred to me that that might be a consideration. And immediately the entire conversation in the room shifted and focused on his contribution because it was so different to what anyone else had said. And I think that's the real key with any situation like that is, you know, that individual contribution was really important, but it wasn't until they were brought into the team that the team benefited from it and drew value from it. And that entire conversation was so much more productive that they came up with there were 3 groups in this session, and that group came up with a series of suggestions around their values and what they wanted their values to be. No one else came anywhere near, and it was entirely down to this individual's contribution. The team benefited hugely from that individual contribution, but they needed to recognise that contribution was valuable. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if I actually answered your question.
No, thanks. No, it does. It does. Thank you, because I think what this helps reinforce, Stephen, is that teams are made up of real people, and real people bring different things to the team. But we also have this thing that teams operate within a context. So we've had one interesting observation through the chat where somebody talked about changing jobs, where he went from one organization to another. He felt very comfortable with the values in one place, and then it made him feel sort of somewhat awkward in a new venue, which leads on to the next theme that I'd like us to explore, which is, given that teams aren't static, we need to grow teams, we need to replenish them. Sometimes we are recruiting to replace people, and we want to make sure that people are going to fit. We also want to make sure they bring something new and interesting to the organization. And the goal for many life sciences companies is to grow, and to, you know, their success is demonstrated by the organization growing. So what I'd like to do is ask panel members now to reflect upon how they bring people into their organizations, what they need, what they think about, and what they do in order to see if they can ensure that, as far as possible, they are bringing new talent and new capabilities and new characteristics into a team, but also that those people are going to align with the organization, the values and the culture that you're building. Any thoughts from the panel?
I'm happy to go first with this one. So
Thanks.
we, no matter the role, the seniority, or whether it's an entry-level role, we hire on attitude rather than solely on ability. Ability. And you spoke earlier around having, you know, the key talent, the individual that's technically wonderful. It doesn't matter to us whether you're technically wonderful. You need to fit within the values and be, you know, within our tribe. So we hire on attitude rather than ability. We can train people. We can train people into our bad habits rather than, you know, retraining the existing bad habits they have from other organizations. So we really hire according to our values, and our values are very people focused. So be a captain, be authentic, brave, creative, kind. I should have come up with an acronym for these. It would have been an awful lot easier for me to remember. But the key test, really, we'll tend to do an online interview to begin with, to get to know the people, and we will ask them technical questions, but also we will ask them about a couple of our values. So we will, on all of our job descriptions, we have these are our values and our behaviors. So we ask them to give examples of when they have demonstrated 2 of our values. And we also ask them about when they've been brave. And I think you can tell a lot about people when you ask them, you know, when have you been brave, and what are you most proud of? You know, you can really see the energy come out in them and what they really love. Once they get past that test, we then bring them on site. And Jeff, I know you've got a different name for this, but this is our kindness test. If you weren't a kind human, then you're not going to fit into our tribe. So we will get an email to say that they have arrived on site, and Jack, who is our lab technician, will walk out of our office, will walk past them with a bin bag, and he will say good morning. And if they don't greet him well, if they ignore him, or they look down their nose at him, they are not our people. They're not going to fit in with our tribe. And if they greet him like he's the wonderful human being that he is, then they pass that first test. And, you know, things hopefully are going to go well. I know, Jeff, you've coined this the bin test, but I'd rather that it was the kindness test. And I think it's, you catch people, they don't feel like they're being interviewed yet. So they're being their real, true, authentic selves. So if you're turning up to an interview and you're feeling a bit nervous, then I think the truth will out. And if you're going to be kind to people who you think are possibly the cleaners, then these are the type of people that we want within our tribe. So I encourage you all to incorporate a kindness test into your interviewing.
Thank you, Claire. That's a great story. Jackie, could you talk for a few minutes about something that you did mention in our previous discussion, where you made a point to us where you said it's really important that anyone in any kind of leadership role remembers teams don't work well automatically. You have to keep on top of it. Would you like to sort of just reflect on some examples of that?
Yes. So I think this is something that I think is really important. So you can get a group of people together, and Stephen and Claire have both mentioned this. They're not a team, they're just a collection of people. So you've got to give them a common purpose, but then there's more to it than just a group of people with a common purpose. So what I've found over the years is you actually have to put some effort in to build the team. And really what comes at the bottom of that is trust. And Claire's already talked about trust. And it's getting people to trust each other. And to do that, it comes back to some of Claire's acronyms. It's getting to know people as people, not just the job that they provide on that particular project or team that they're sitting on. So who is that person as an individual? How do I work best with that person as an individual? Because you cannot use the same style with everybody in a team. You've got to be able to move your style to fit with the team. It doesn't change you as a person, it just changes the way that you interact with people to get the best out of that team member on that team. But I think, you know, so it takes a bit of time to build that. But once you've started that, you can't just stop it. You've got to continually nurture a team. So once it gets going, it's okay. I think this has become more obvious to me over recent years with COVID, particularly when people are working remotely. Then it's really easy to form a team and be a great team and have fun and all the rest of it when you're together in the same room. When you're remote or across countries, it becomes much more difficult. So some of the things that we've put in place to try and alleviate some of these things is we have a weekly meeting and we rotate the chair in the weekly meeting. So everybody has a chance to be the chair of the meeting. It gets engagement with that team and keeps them together. We also introduced a 15-minute stand-up call in the morning. It's not compulsory. People can join if they want. It's not a formal meeting. They can talk about things that need actioned, or they can just talk in general about themselves and did they have a nice weekend or what they did last night. So it's a way of being able to just create a bit of team spirit in a essentially non-working environment, even though it's happening in the workday. So I think there's little things that you can do that nurture this team. I think the other thing is to bear in mind that teams don't stay static. You've already talked about how you have to recruit people in, but teams will morph because the objective changes. So if you're running a project, if you're running a drug discovery project, you're going to start in the early hit identification phase. You're going to go through lead optimization. You're going to identify your candidate. You're going to be putting people like Claire in. The natural skills and the talents are going to be different all the way through that process. So the ability to create that spirit and bring people in and out of that team as appropriate is really, really key to the success overall. So it takes active management.
Good, great. I think, Jackie, you highlighted something that's still with us, which is the consequences of the COVID experience that we've all been through. And in many ways, remote working is a great enabler. You know, it changes people's lives in lots and lots of positive ways. But there are consequences in terms of team engagement and team alignment. For anybody on the panel, any further thoughts on how do you sustain team culture where people are not physically present regularly?
I can take that one, Jeff. We brought in some internal awards a few years ago, and as I've already said, I'm a fan of wordplay and a massive fan of shoes. Yes, they are all real. So we come up with internal awards that anybody can nominate at any time, and they go up in grades. So the first one is a book or a music token. So it's Muse. The second one is booze. The third one, shoes. And the highest one is snooze. So you get a day off. Anybody can nominate anybody at any time, and I don't think I've ever turned any of them down. In fact, I think I've upgraded one or two of them. So anybody from within the organization, they don't have to nominate within the team. It can be across. The only person that can't receive an award is me. I don't qualify. And it's glorious to see when individuals are nominated, and they don't know. We give all these out at our team meetings, and I think at least once a month somebody gets an award, and to see them receive it on screen from their colleagues. And at one point, actually, there were two individuals who'd worked together on a project, and they nominated each other. So why not? Absolutely, let's give them both a shoes award. And to see, one talk about it on the screen and then another one talk about it on the screen, and the camaraderie afterwards, it builds trust, it builds engagement. And I don't have a metric for how much it's cost versus what we've got in return, but the goodwill and the joy and what it's done for the culture is absolutely brilliant. So again, I encourage you to do these internal ad hoc things. I think that nobody enjoys performance reviews, whether it's every 3 months or 6 months or every year, because we focus on the negatives. We never remember the positive stuff. So to celebrate success as often as possible, even with these little things, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Can I ask Claire a question on that?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So I totally agree. We've got tons of different reward sort of systems that we can use. Where I think it is challenging is when you go from a small organisation to a larger organisation. What are your thoughts, Claire, on scaling an organisation and still maintaining the ability to do those kinds of things?
I completely agree, Jack, and it's something that is kind of, I can see it in my peripheral vision all the time around how do we maintain this culture. As I said, we've got 15 people, and we opened our labs 3.5 years ago, so it's still relatively quick in terms of growth, but this is something that I think will take up a significant amount of my time and my headspace going forward to ensure that we do maintain that culture. And I think actually reviewing the culture and how we're doing, and are we celebrating success, and are we doing enough as we go forward is an incredibly good idea. but I'm not a fan of surveying for just because you feel like you should. We need to count what counts, so I need to make sure that we are counting what counts at all times. But yeah, it does worry me as we grow how we maintain this, but we must.
Yeah. I'm going to step away very briefly from the duties of chairing the discussion to chipping in with a contribution. And the contribution that I wanted to make at this point was building upon this theme that's been mentioned a couple of times about performance reviews. I think it's fair comment that very few people actually look forward to performance reviews, whether you're being reviewed or whether you're conducting the review. It's never an easy task. One of the things, though, that I think is really important in a team context is to recognize what people bring. And the way I work on this is I focus, whenever possible, I focus on understanding what people's strengths are, because all of us have strengths. We all have capabilities. And in terms of a method for improving performance, focusing on people's strengths actually pays dividends very, very quickly. And it's very empowering and uplifting for people. There seems to be, I don't know whether it's because of a desire for balance or a sense that maybe we should be logical, but there seems to be something in the design of lots of performance systems that says, oh, you've got to spend an equal amount of time talking about strengths and weaknesses. You've got to have just as many weaknesses as you have strengths. You've got to, you're not humble, you're not grounded if you talk too much about strengths. But when I talk about individual performance, I often say to people, it's better to think of, what are your top 3 or 4 strengths, but what's your one thing that you want to do something about? Because building on your strengths enables you to focus on what you're good at. But having a list of 6 development goals is going to dilute your efforts. Whereas if you have one thing that you focus on, it enables you to really put some effort into it. And I think in a team context, this is easier to be a functioning member of the team, and it's also much easier for the team leader if there's clarity about saying, this team member, they bring these 2 or 3 top strengths, and the one thing that they want to do more of or get better at is this. Person number 2 in the team, top 3 or 4 strengths, one thing they're going to do to try to improve. It's more manageable if you're looking at a small number of strengths and a single development goal. If you are trying to say 6 strengths and 6 weaknesses, it becomes very, very, very difficult and very, very complicated. So stepping back into my chairing role, I'm just going to go around the group and ask for a brief sort of 1-minute closing thought from each person. And then I'm going to summarize up for the whole group. And I think Mona Lisa will probably step in towards the end. So if we go in reverse clockwise this time, Stephen, 1-minute summary from you on your thoughts about today.
Very quickly, I completely agree with basically everything that's been said by the other panelists today. I think this idea of culture does develop organically within an organization, and it can absolutely develop organically. But if you want it to develop positively, you should really pay attention to it, and you really need to do a great job of looking after your people and making sure that you are listening to them. And just a reassurance on that for people around the leadership thing. Most leaders that I speak to, most people who run businesses, are keen to hear what they can do to improve. Even if they are busy and looking at other things, they want to improve. They want the business to thrive. They want their people to want to enjoy working there. Just finding the mechanism to make that happen is important. Absolutely, focusing on values is key. And I love that Claire focuses so heavily on values when she's recruiting staff, because I think if you can get the alignment, and actually this goes back to something Dave said as well in his comment, if you can get that alignment between your people and your values within the business, recruiting becomes easier. The next stage, when you're trying to build that team and build that engagement with the team, that becomes easier as well. Your team will gel together more readily if they share values, common values with each other and with the team. So if you're getting that values piece right and you're measuring it and you're making sure that everybody is essentially on the same page, the team will work well together. The culture will evolve in a really positive way.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Claire, 1 minute summary.
Yeah, people work with people ultimately throughout this organization and just throughout any sector, and we've got to ensure that we're treating people like people, not like professionals. You know, we are all individuals. We have lives outside of that. So looking at people's strengths is superb, but we've got to understand the way they think and the other things that are important to them. Culture is absolutely key to any organization. Recruit wonderful people that align with your values, give them an environment in which they can succeed, and let them get on with their job. And in some cases that means identifying opportunities for them, getting out of their way. As leaders, we are here to serve, and we need to communicate effectively, and we need to ask ourselves, are we the haves or the have-nots? So do we have humility, authenticity, vulnerability, and empathy? And if we do, bloody wonderful, celebrate that success. And if we don't, do something about it.
Great, thanks, Claire. Closing thoughts, Jackie? I think you're on mute, Jackie.
I've got nothing really to add on to what Claire and Stephen have said. What I would just add is the one thing that comes to mind listening to that conversation is about feedback. So what we have to be, every single member of the team has to be skilled in giving and receiving feedback. And that's what helps. It comes back to the communication, the trust, the culture, everything. But if you can't talk and you can't give and receive feedback, that will hold the team back. So that's the one thing I would add to that.
Good, great. Thank you, Jackie. Well, thank you to all our panelists. I think we've had a very lively and engaged discussion. Thanks to everybody in the audience. Thanks for the questions that we've had submitted and also the observations that we've had as we've gone along. I hope we've incorporated those appropriately and responded to everything as we've gone along. I think our closing thought is that teams are made up of real people. So we've talked a lot about engaging, communicating, trust, sharing values. But the other key thought is that teams do outperform individuals. Teams are wonderful things, and the more you can do to enable your team to be successful, the better you're spending your time. So Mona Lisa, over to you.
Thank you very much, everyone, and very wonderful panel. That was a brilliant discussion. Just to close it off from my end, our next session is at 12:30, so in an hour's time, on overcoming imposter syndrome, which is due to be a very insightful session. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I hope that you can dial in the next one. By all means, if you have any questions outside of the conference, do reach out and we'll be happy to help. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Shortly. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.